The dust rose in thick clouds around Victoria Olsen's feet as she stood on the wooden platform, her hand gripping her cousin Sarah's trembling fingers so tightly she could feel both their pulses racing together. The summer heat of 1882 bore down on McGill, Nevada, like a physical weight, and Victoria could taste the salt of her own sweat, mixed with tears she refused to let fall. Around them, men with cold eyes and calculating expressions gathered closer, their voices a low rumble of appraisal and negotiation that made her stomach turn. She had never imagined her life would come to this, standing on an auction block like cattle, but her uncle's debts had sealed their fate when he died 3 weeks ago, and the bank had wasted no time calling in what was owed. Sarah whimpered beside her, and Victoria squeezed her hand harder. Her cousin was only 19, 2 years younger than Victoria's own, 21 years, and far more fragile in spirit. They had grown up together after Victoria's parents died in a wagon accident when she was 12, and now they faced this nightmare side by side. The auctioneer, a portly man with a voice that carried across the town square, was already starting his practice speech about their qualities, describing them like horses for sale. Victoria wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but armed men surrounded the platform, and her uncle's creditors watched with satisfied expressions. "These two fine young ladies come as a matched pair," the auctioneer bellowed. "Healthy, capable of all manner of household duties, and educated enough to read and write. We will start the bidding at $200 for the both of them." Victoria's eyes scanned the crowd desperately, looking for any face that might show mercy or kindness. Most of the men looked like miners or ranch hands, rough and weathered, but her gaze caught on one figure standing slightly apart from the rest. He was tall, perhaps in his middle 20s, with dark hair that touched his collar beneath a dusty black hat. His face was angular and sun-bronzed, and unlike the other men, whose eyes crawled over her and Sarah with obvious intent, his expression was unreadable. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, leather chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a gun belt that sat easy on his hips like he knew how to use it. The bidding started slowly. A mine foreman offered $220. A saloon owner countered with $250. Victoria felt Sarah's hand grow clammy in hers as the price climbed. Then the cowboy stepped forward, his boots making soft sounds in the dirt. $500, he said, his voice quiet but carrying authority. The crowd fell silent, turning to look at him. The amount was more than double the current bid. The auctioneer's eyebrows rose. "Well now, that is a generous offer. Do I hear $550? The mine foreman scowled and shook his head. The saloon owner spat in the dust and walked away. No one else spoke. Victoria stared at the cowboy, trying to read something, anything, in his face. His eyes met hers for just a moment, a clear gray like storm clouds, before he looked back at the auctioneer. $500 going once, twice, sold to the gentleman there. Come settle up and collect your purchase." Victoria felt the world tilt. Her knees went weak, but she forced herself to stay standing as the cowboy approached the auction table to count out gold coins from a leather pouch. Sarah was crying openly now, and Victoria pulled her closer, wrapping an arm around her cousin's shoulders. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The cowboy completed his transaction and received 2 folded papers, the contracts of indenture that bound them to him for 7 years to work off their uncle's debt. He walked toward the platform, and Victoria straightened her spine, meeting his gaze with as much dignity as she could muster. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with a scar that cut through his left eyebrow and eyes that held something she could not quite name. "Come on down," he said quietly. "My name is Yates Jensen. I have a ranch about 10 miles north of here." Victoria helped Sarah down from the platform, keeping herself between her cousin and this stranger who now owned them both. Her legs felt unsteady, but she refused to show weakness. Yates Jensen looked at them both for a long moment, then did something that made Victoria's breath catch in her throat. He unfolded both papers, the legal documents that bound them to 7 years of servitude, and without ceremony, tore them cleanly in half. Then in half again. He let the pieces flutter to the ground like strange snow in the Nevada heat. "You are both free," he said simply. "I will not hold anyone against their will." Victoria stared at the torn papers scattered in the dust, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Around them, the crowd began to murmur and disperse, disappointed the show was over. Sarah's crying had stopped mid-sob, and she looked between Victoria and Yates with wide, confused eyes. "I do not understand," Victoria finally managed to say, her voice rough. "You just paid $500. "I did." Yates bent to pick up the pieces of paper and stuffed them in his pocket. "And now you are free to go wherever you wish. But if you have nowhere to go, I have work available at my ranch. Fair wages, your own cabin, and no strings attached. You can leave whenever you want." Victoria's throat tightened with an emotion she could not name. After weeks of fear and desperation, after standing on that platform expecting the worst, this cowboy had just given them back their freedom without asking anything in return. It made no sense. People did not do things like this, especially not for two women they did not even know. "Why?" The question came out barely above a whisper. Yates's jaw tightened, and for a moment, something dark flickered across his face. "Because I have seen what happens to women who get bought like property. I will not be part of that, but I also know you likely have nowhere to go and no money, so I am offering work if you want it, real work for real pay." Sarah pressed closer to Victoria's side. "Is this a trick?" "No trick." Yates pulled out the leather pouch again and counted out $20 in coins. He held them out to Victoria. "Here, enough for a stage ticket east if you want to leave Nevada, or a room in town while you figure things out. Your choice." Victoria looked at the money, then at his face, searching for deception or hidden motives. She had learned long ago that nothing came without a price, especially from men. But his expression remained open, patient, waiting for her decision. Finally, she reached out and took the coins, feeling the weight of them in her palm. "What kind of work?" she asked cautiously. "I have a cattle ranch. Right now it is just me and 2 ranch hands. We need someone to manage the house, do the cooking, maybe help with the books since you said you can read and write. Your cousin could help with the chickens and garden if she's willing. You would have your own space, locked from the inside, if that makes you feel safer." Victoria glanced at Sarah, who was looking at her with desperate hope. They truly had nowhere else to go. Their uncle's house had been seized, and they had no other family in Nevada or anywhere else. The thought of trying to make it on their own, with just $20 in a mining town filled with rough men, was terrifying. At least this way they would have shelter and a chance to save money for a real future. "We will come with you," Victoria said, lifting her chin. "But I warn you, Mr. Jensen, if you try anything untoward with either of us, I will find a way to make you regret it." The corners of his mouth twitched slightly, not quite a smile. "Fair enough. I have a wagon at the livery. Do you have any belongings to collect?" "Everything we owned was sold," Victoria said flatly. "We have only the clothes we are wearing." Yates nodded, his expression sympathetic but not pitying. "We will get you some proper things once we reach the ranch. Come on." He turned and walked toward the livery stable, and after a moment's hesitation, Victoria and Sarah followed. The afternoon sun blazed overhead as they made their way through McGill's dusty streets, past the saloons and mining offices, past the men who stared at them with curiosity and speculation. Victoria kept her head high and Sarah close, very aware of Yates walking slightly ahead, giving them space but clearly protecting them from the attention of others. The livery was at the edge of town, a large weathered building that smelled of hay and horses. Yates's wagon was a sturdy ranch wagon with high sides, hitched to 2 strong-looking horses. He helped them up onto the bench seat, his touch on Victoria's elbow brief and impersonal, before climbing up himself and taking the reins. As they rolled out of McGill heading north into the open range, Victoria felt something inside her chest loosen slightly. The town fell away behind them, and the vast Nevada landscape opened up ahead, all sage-covered hills and distant mountains. The air smelled cleaner out here, away from the mining operations and crowded streets. Sarah leaned against Victoria's shoulder, exhausted from fear and crying, and gradually her breathing evened out as she dozed. Yates drove in silence for a while, his attention on the rough trail. Finally, Victoria gathered her courage to speak. "Why did you really do it?" she asked quietly, not wanting to wake Sarah. "The truth." He was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "My mother was sold at auction when I was 8 years old, after my father died and creditors came calling. A man bought her and worked her to death in a brothel in Virginia City within 2 years. I was already gone by then, living with a neighboring rancher who took me in, but I never forgot standing there watching men bid on her like she was nothing." Victoria felt her chest constrict. "I am sorry. It was a long time ago. His voice was neutral, but his jaw was tight. I swore then that if I ever had the means, I would not let it happen to anyone else if I could prevent it. So, when I heard about the auction today while picking up supplies, I came. I did not know if I would bid until I saw you two standing there. You spent $500 on strangers. I spent $500 on doing what I should have done for my mother, if I had been old enough and strong enough back then. He glanced at her, and she saw pain in those gray eyes despite his calm demeanor. Money comes and goes. I worked hard, saved, built my ranch. I can make more. But some things, once done, cannot be undone. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes for the first time since stepping onto that platform. She blinked them away fiercely. "Thank you," she whispered. "For my cousin and for me. Thank you." He nodded once, then returned his attention to driving. They continued north into the afternoon, the sun slowly descending toward the western mountains. The landscape grew more rugged, with rocky outcroppings and deeper gullies cutting through the rangeland. Eventually, Yates turned the wagon off the main trail onto a narrower track that wound between low hills. "Almost there," he said. "Another mile or so." Sarah stirred and woke, blinking in confusion before remembering where they were. She sat up straight, looking around at the wild country surrounding them. "Is it safe out here?" "Safe as anywhere," Yates replied. "We occasionally have trouble with rustlers or the odd cougar going after the cattle, but the ranch house is solid and we keep watch. You will be all right." The ranch came into view as they crested a rise. Victoria felt her breath catch at the sight. It was modest but well kept, with a sturdy log house, a large barn, several outbuildings, and corrals holding perhaps 24 horses. The land around it was good grazing country, rolling hills dotted with cattle bearing a brand she could not make out from this distance. 2 men were working near the barn and looked up as the wagon approached. Yates drove straight to the house and set the brake. "Let me introduce you to my hands, then I will show you your quarters." The 2 ranch hands walked over, both looking curious. The first was a weathered older man, with gray in his beard and a permanent squint from years in the sun. The second was younger, perhaps 30, with reddish hair and a friendly open face. "This is Tom Burnett," Yates said, gesturing to the older man. "And this is Charlie Wade. They have worked with me for 3 years now. Good men, both. Tom, Charlie, this is Victoria Olsen and Sarah Olsen. They will be staying on to help manage the house and will be treated with complete respect. Is that understood?" Both men nodded, Tom touching his hat brim. "Madam, Miss." "Pleasure to meet you," Charlie added with a genuine smile. "We have been living on beans and jerky for too long. Will be right nice to have proper cooking again, if you do not mind my saying so." Victoria found herself smiling slightly despite her exhaustion. "I do not mind. I am a decent cook, though I will need to learn what you have available." "I will show you the kitchen and pantry," Yates said. He climbed down from the wagon and helped them both down. "Your cabin is just over here." He led them to a small but well-built log cabin about 50 yards from the main house. It had a covered porch, 2 windows with real glass, and a sturdy door with a lock on the inside, just as he had promised. Inside was simple but clean. 2 beds with frames and mattresses, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove for heat, shelves on the walls, and even a mirror. Curtains hung at the windows, faded but mended with care. "This was where my hands lived before I built the bunkhouse," Yates explained. "I kept it maintained in case I needed space for visitors or additional workers. There is a pump just outside for water, and the privy is behind those trees there. I will have the boys bring over some things tomorrow, clothes and such. For tonight, make yourselves comfortable. I will bring over supper in an hour or so." He left them alone, closing the door behind him. Victoria and Sarah stood in the middle of the cabin, both almost afraid to move, afraid this might all disappear like a dream. Then Sarah burst into tears again, but this time they were tears of relief. "We are safe," she sobbed. "We are actually safe." Victoria pulled her into a tight embrace, her own tears finally falling. "Yes, we are safe." They clung to each other as the golden afternoon light streamed through the windows, washing away the horror of the auction and the weeks of fear that had preceded it. For the first time in so long, Victoria allowed herself to believe they might actually have a future. True to his word, Yates brought over supper an hour later, knocking politely and waiting for Victoria to open the door. He carried a tray with beans, cornbread, and coffee. Simple fare, but generous portions and warm. "Thank you," Victoria said, taking the tray. They stood there for a moment, an awkward silence stretching between them. Now that the immediate crisis had passed, she found herself noticing things about him she had been too frightened to register before. The way he stood with unconscious confidence, the calluses on his hands from hard work, the kindness in his eyes despite the hard life etched into his face. "If you need anything during the night, the main house door is unlocked," he said. "Tom sleeps in the bunkhouse with Charlie, so I am alone in there. But I give you my word, I will not bother you. You have your lock, and I will respect your privacy." "I believe you," Victoria said, and realized with some surprise that she meant it. There was something fundamentally decent about Yates Jensen, something solid and trustworthy that she recognized on an instinctive level. He nodded, looking slightly relieved. "Good. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be soon enough to work out the details of everything." After he left, Victoria and Sarah ate in hungry silence, the food tasting like the best meal they had ever had, simply because they were eating it as free women in a place of safety. They went to bed as the sun set, both exhausted beyond measure, and despite everything they had been through, Victoria slept more soundly than she had in weeks. She woke to the sound of roosters crowing and early morning bird song. Gray dawn light filtered through the windows, and for a moment she could not remember where she was. Then memory flooded back, and she sat up carefully to avoid waking Sarah, who was still deeply asleep in the other bed. Victoria rose and washed her face in the basin of water they had drawn from the pump the night before. Her dress was wrinkled and dusty from days of wear, and she felt grimy despite the wash. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her brown hair hung limp and tangled, her face was too thin, and her green eyes held shadows that had not been there 6 months ago. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Miss Olsen?" It was Yates's voice. "I have some things for you, if you are awake." She opened the door to find him standing there with an armload of clothes and a large package wrapped in brown paper. The early morning light turned his dark hair slightly auburn, and she noticed he had shaved since yesterday, his jaw clean and defined. "These belong to the wife of the rancher who took me in when I was a boy," he explained, offering her the clothes. "Mrs. Patterson died 2 years ago, and her husband asked me to keep her things in case they were ever needed. I think you and your cousin are about her size. There are undergarments, dresses, nightgowns, everything you might need. And this," he held up the package, "is soap, hairbrushes, and a few other necessities. I asked the general store owner in town to put together what he thought women might need." Victoria took the items, deeply moved by his thoughtfulness. "This is very kind. How much do we owe you?" "Nothing. Consider it part of your wages. An advance if you like." He shifted his weight, looking slightly uncomfortable. "I know this situation is strange for all of us. I want you to understand that I see you as employees, not anything else. You are safe here. You have my word on that, for whatever a cowboy's word is worth." "I think your word is worth a great deal," Victoria said softly. Their eyes met and held for a moment, and she felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the rising sun. He cleared his throat and looked away. "Right. Well, I will let you get settled. When you are ready, come over to the main house, and I will show you the kitchen. No rush. Take your time." After he left, Victoria brought the clothes inside and gently woke Sarah. Her cousin's eyes went wide when she saw the clean dresses and new undergarments, and for the first time in days, a genuine smile crossed her face. They washed as best they could with cold water from the pump, and dressed in the clean clothes, which fit reasonably well, with only minor adjustments needed. Mrs. Patterson had been a similar height to Victoria, and only slightly larger than Sarah. The simple calico dresses felt like luxury after days in the same soiled clothing. Victoria brushed out her hair until it shone, then helped Sarah with hers, braiding it neatly. When they finally made their way to the main house, the sun had fully risen and the ranch was alive with activity. Tom and Charlie were already working with the horses in one of the corrals, and the lowing of cattle drifted on the morning breeze. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, wild and beautiful and free. Yates answered their knock immediately, almost as if he had been waiting. "Come in, welcome." The interior of the main house was larger than Victoria had expected, with a central living area dominated by a stone fireplace, a separate kitchen with a large iron stove, and doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. The furnishings were simple but well made, and everything was surprisingly clean for a house occupied only by men. "I try to keep things tidy," Yates said, noticing her look around. "But I will admit the cooking has suffered. I can make beans and coffee, and that is about the extent of my skill. The pantry is through here." He showed them a well-stocked storage room with sacks of flour, cornmeal, beans, and dried goods. There were even some canned vegetables and fruit, likely bought from town. Slabs of bacon and salted beef hung from hooks, and shelves held jars of preserves. "We butcher a cow every few months," Yates explained, "and the chickens provide eggs. There is a root cellar out back with potatoes and such. You are welcome to use whatever you need. I trust your judgment." Victoria ran her hand along the clean wooden counter, feeling a strange sense of homecoming. She had always enjoyed cooking, and the idea of managing a real kitchen again, of creating meals and keeping house, felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that had been lost. "I can work with this," she said with growing confidence. "Sarah is excellent with baking. Between us, we will feed you all well." "I do not doubt it." Yates leaned against the doorframe, watching them with an expression that was hard to read. "Let me be clear about expectations. I need breakfast around dawn, midday meal at noon, and supper at dusk. The men eat in the bunkhouse usually, but sometimes we all eat together in here when the weather is bad or we are working close to the house. I would appreciate help keeping the house clean and the laundry done. Beyond that, your time is your own. I will pay you each $20 a month, which is fair wages for this work. At the end of each month, the money is yours to keep or save as you see fit. Does that sound acceptable?" Victoria almost gasped. $20 each was far more than she had expected, more than many men earned for harder labor. "That is very generous." "It is fair," he corrected. "You will earn it. Ranch work is not easy, even housework. But I believe in paying properly for labor done well." He straightened. "I will leave you to get acquainted with everything. I have work to do with the cattle. If you need anything, just ask one of the boys to fetch me." After he left, Victoria and Sarah explored the kitchen more thoroughly, taking inventory and planning meals. Despite the strangeness of their situation, or perhaps because of it, Victoria felt something she had not felt in a very long time: hope. They had work, safety, and a chance to build new lives. And there was something about Yates Jensen that made her feel protected rather than threatened, respected rather than owned. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Victoria woke at dawn to make breakfast, usually biscuits and bacon with eggs and coffee, which she served to Yates before he headed out to work. He was always polite and appreciative, though she noticed he was not much of a talker in the early mornings. Sarah managed the chickens and started a small kitchen garden, showing more life and energy than Victoria had seen from her cousin in months. They cooked midday meals and hearty suppers and kept the house spotless. Yates worked from dawn until well after dark most days, coming in exhausted and dusty. But he always stopped to thank them for the meal and ask if they needed anything. Tom and Charlie were equally respectful, often going out of their way to help with heavy tasks like hauling water or bringing in firewood. The ranch felt less like a workplace and more like a family, albeit an unusual one. A week passed, then two. Victoria found herself watching for Yates throughout the day, listening for his step on the porch, feeling an odd flutter in her chest when he smiled at something she said. She told herself it was simply gratitude, but she knew it was becoming something more. The way he treated her with such respect and care was unlike anything she had experienced. He saw her as a person, not property or a burden, and that recognition awakened feelings she had kept locked away. One evening after supper, Yates asked if she would help him with the ranch accounts. They sat at the large table in the living area, the ledger spread between them, and he explained his system of tracking expenses and income. Victoria found she had a head for numbers, quickly spotting errors he had made and suggesting better ways to organize the information. "You are good at this," he said with genuine admiration. "Much better than me. Would you be willing to take over the bookkeeping? I would add another $5 a month to your wages." "I would be happy to help," Victoria said, pleased by his trust. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the pencil at the same moment, and she felt a spark of electricity at the contact. Yates jerked his hand back as if burned, his face flushing slightly. "Sorry," he muttered. "I did not mean to—" "It is all right," Victoria said softly. Her heart was beating faster than it should. They looked at each other across the ledger, and the air between them felt charged with something unspoken. Sarah's voice calling from the kitchen broke the moment. "Victoria, can you help me with something?" Victoria rose quickly, flustered. "I should go. We can finish this tomorrow." "Yes, tomorrow." Yates's voice was rough. He did not look at her as she left. That night, lying in bed while Sarah slept, Victoria stared at the ceiling and acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with Yates Jensen. It was foolish and complicated and probably hopeless, but her heart did not care about any of that. He had saved her, given her freedom and dignity, and treated her with a kindness that made her soul ache with longing. But he saw her as an employee, someone under his protection. He would never cross that line, even if he felt something in return. The summer heat intensified as July burned into August. The work was hard but satisfying, and Victoria felt stronger and healthier than she had in years. Her dresses fit better, as she regained weight lost during the terrible weeks before the auction. Sarah bloomed in the safety and routine, laughing again and singing while she worked in the garden. One scorching afternoon, Tom came running to the house, his face urgent. "Miss Olsen, we need you. Yates got hurt." Victoria's blood went cold. She dropped the laundry she was folding and ran after Tom to where the men were gathered near the far corral. Yates was sitting on the ground, his left arm held awkwardly against his chest, his face pale beneath the dust and sweat. "What happened?" Victoria demanded, dropping to her knees beside him. "Horse spooked and threw me into the fence," Yates said through gritted teeth. "I think my shoulder is dislocated." Victoria had seen injuries like this before. Her father had been thrown from a horse once, and the doctor had shown her how the shoulder could pop out of joint. "We need to get it back in place. Can you stand?" With Tom and Charlie's help, they got Yates into the house and seated in a sturdy chair. Victoria sent Sarah for clean water and bandages, then knelt in front of Yates, her hands hovering over his injured shoulder. "This is going to hurt," she warned him, "but it will hurt worse if we leave it." "I know." Sweat beaded his forehead. "Do what you need to do." Victoria positioned herself carefully, remembering what the doctor had shown her years ago. She placed one hand on his shoulder blade and the other on his wrist, then looked into his eyes. On 3, 1, 2. She pulled and rotated his arm on 2 instead of 3, and felt the joint pop back into place with an audible sound. Yates let out a harsh gasp of pain, his good hand gripping the chair arm hard enough to leave dents, but he did not cry out. "Done," Victoria said softly, her hands still supporting his arm. "How does it feel?" "Better. Much better." His breathing was labored, but his color was already improving. "Thank you." Sarah arrived with the water and bandages, and Victoria carefully cleaned the scrapes on his shoulder and neck where he had hit the fence. Her fingers trembled slightly as she worked, aware of the intimacy of touching him this way, feeling the heat of his skin and the strength of the muscles beneath. When she tied the sling to support his arm while it healed, her face was very close to his. "You should rest for a few days," she said quietly. "Let it heal properly. I cannot afford to rest. The cattle need tending. Tom and Charlie can manage for a few days. You will do yourself more harm by working too soon." She met his eyes, seeing the pain and frustration there, but also something else, something that made her breath catch. "Please, let me take care of you the way you took care of Sarah and me." His jaw worked for a moment, then he nodded slowly. "All right, a few days." Over the next week, Victoria nursed him with a devotion that went far beyond employee duty. She made special foods to build his strength, changed his bandages with gentle hands, and insisted he rest even when he grew restless and irritable from inactivity. They spent long hours talking as he recovered, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. Victoria learned that Yates had worked as a ranch hand from the age of 8 until he was 20, saving every penny he could. When the rancher who had taken him in died and left him a small inheritance, Yates had used it to buy this land and start his own operation. He had been running it for 4 years now, slowly building his herd and his reputation. His dream was to make it the best cattle ranch in Nevada, proof that a poor orphan could become something more through hard work and determination. In turn, Victoria told him about her parents, the happy childhood that ended too soon, the years with her uncle, who had been kind but foolish with money. She spoke of her love for books and learning, her frustration at a world that gave women so few choices. She told him things she had never told anyone, and he listened with an attention that made her feel truly heard. "You are wasted as a housekeeper," he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. His arm was out of the sling now, though still sore. You are smart enough to run your own business, manage a ranch, anything you wanted. Women do not get those opportunities, Victoria said, with a trace of bitterness. We get to be wives or servants, or, if we are unlucky, worse things than that. Maybe that will change someday. Yates turned to look at her, his gray eyes intense in the fading light. You deserve better than the hand life dealt you. So do you, Victoria said softly. But we make the best of what we have. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, closer to each other than was probably proper, but neither of them moved away. Victoria could feel the warmth of his body beside her, could smell the clean scent of the soap he used and the leather of his vest. She wanted desperately to reach out and touch him, to close the small distance between them, but she did not dare. Victoria. His voice was low and rough. I need to tell you something. Her heart stuttered. Yes. These past 2 months, having you here, it has. He struggled for words. You have become important to me, more important than you should be, considering our arrangement. I do not want you to feel uncomfortable or obligated in any way. You are free to leave whenever you want, just like I promised. But I need you to know that He stopped, jaw clenching with frustration at his inability to express what he felt. Victoria's hand moved before her mind could stop it, reaching out to cover his where it rested on the porch railing. I feel it too, she whispered. I tried not to, but I do. His hand turned under hers, their fingers intertwining. The simple touch sent warmth flooding through her entire body. They sat there holding hands as full darkness fell, both afraid to speak and break whatever spell had been cast. Finally, Yates said, I do not want to take advantage. You came here with nothing, dependent on me for everything. I will not use that against you. You are not taking advantage. Victoria squeezed his hand. You gave me freedom and respect. You see me as an equal. That is why I feel this way. Not because I owe you, but because of who you are. He turned to face her fully, and in the starlight his expression was raw with emotion. I am falling in love with you, Victoria. I think I have been since the moment I saw you on that platform refusing to cry. You were so strong, so fierce. You took my breath away. Tears sprang to Victoria's eyes. I love you too. I did not want to. I told myself it was foolish, but my heart would not listen. Yates raised their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. What do we do now? We figure it out together, Victoria said. If you are willing. I am willing. He smiled, and it transformed his usually serious face into something beautiful. More than willing. They stayed on the porch, talking late into the night, making plans and promises, finally giving voice to the feelings that had been growing between them for weeks. When Victoria finally returned to her cabin in the small hours of the morning, Sarah woke enough to see her glowing expression. Something happened, Sarah murmured sleepily. Something wonderful, Victoria confirmed, and went to bed with her heart singing. Their relationship deepened through the late summer and into fall. Yates courted her properly despite the unconventional circumstances, bringing her wildflowers from the range, taking her riding on the gentler horses to show her the beauty of the land, stealing kisses when they were alone that left them both breathless and wanting more. Tom and Charlie noticed the change and approved heartily, both of them clearly fond of their boss and happy to see him finding love. Sarah initially worried that Victoria would forget about her, but Victoria was quick to reassure her cousin that nothing would change between them. In fact, Sarah herself was receiving attention from Charlie Wade, whose obvious admiration made the younger woman blush and smile. Victoria watched their tentative courtship with approval, glad to see Sarah coming fully out of her shell. As autumn painted the landscape in shades of gold and red, Yates asked Victoria to marry him. They were alone on the range, having ridden out to check on a section of fence, when he dismounted and helped her down from her horse. The Nevada sky stretched endlessly blue above them, and the air smelled of sage and coming winter. I know we have not known each other long, he said, holding both her hands in his, but I know my heart. I want to spend my life with you, Victoria. I want to build this ranch into something great, and I want you by my side as my partner and my wife. Will you marry me? Victoria felt tears of joy streak down her face. Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes. He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and she melted against him, feeling safe and loved and cherished. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "The only thing I have of hers. I want you to have it." Victoria slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit perfectly. "I will treasure it always, and I will treasure you." They were married in October, in a simple ceremony at the small church in McGill. Tom and Charlie stood up for Yates, and Sarah was Victoria's maid of honor. The circuit preacher happened to be in town, and he performed the ceremony with warmth and sincerity. Victoria wore a new dress of deep blue that Yates had bought for her in town, and she had never felt more beautiful than when she saw the love shining in his eyes as she walked toward him. After the ceremony, they had a celebration at the ranch with a few neighboring ranchers and their families, whom Yates had befriended over the years. There was food and music, and Victoria danced in her husband's arms under the stars, feeling like the luckiest woman alive. The girl who had stood on an auction block in terror and shame was gone, replaced by a woman who was loved and valued and free. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, Yates treating her with a reverence that made her feel cherished beyond measure. They made love in the big bed in the main house, which was now their shared home, learning each other's bodies with patient exploration and growing desire. Victoria had been nervous, knowing little of such things beyond whispered conversations with married women, but Yates was gentle and attentive, making sure she found as much pleasure as he did. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Victoria's head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. "I never thought I could be this happy," she murmured. "After everything that happened, I thought I would spend my life afraid and alone." "You will never be alone again," Yates promised, his arms tightening around her. "Whatever comes, we face it together." As winter settled over the ranch, Victoria and Yates found their rhythm as husband and wife. She continued to manage the household and help with the books, but now she also participated in decisions about the ranch itself, her sharp mind and practical nature helping them plan for the future. Yates valued her opinion on everything from which bulls to breed to how to negotiate better prices in town. Sarah and Charlie's courtship progressed as well, and in December they announced their engagement. They would marry in the spring, and Yates offered to build them their own cabin on the ranch property. Victoria was thrilled to know her cousin would stay close, and the two couples spent many evenings together, planning and dreaming. The winter was harsh that year, with heavy snows that trapped them all close to the ranch for weeks at a time. But Victoria found she did not mind. She was warm and safe with Yates, and the forced intimacy of being snowbound only deepened their bond. They talked for hours by the fire, made love in the warmth of their bed while wind howled outside, and discovered new depths to their connection. In February, Victoria realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before telling Yates. When she finally shared the news over breakfast one morning, his face went through a series of expressions from shock to wonder to pure joy in the space of seconds. "A baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Victoria asked, suddenly nervous. He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "Happy does not begin to cover it. I am overwhelmed. I am terrified. I am grateful beyond words." He pulled back to look at her face, his hands framing her cheeks. "You have given me everything, Victoria. A home, a family, a future. I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you." "You already deserve me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You saved me, in every way a person can be saved. I love you so much." Their son was born in early October of 1883, exactly 1 year after their wedding. The labor was long and difficult, with only Sarah and the ranch's neighbor, an older woman with experience in midwifery, to help. Yates paced outside the bedroom door for 16 hours, nearly wearing a path in the floorboards, until Sarah finally emerged with a tired smile. "You have a son," she announced, "and Victoria is asking for you." Yates burst into the room to find Victoria propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. He approached almost reverently, staring down at the red-faced infant who had already changed their world. "He is perfect," Yates whispered. "You are amazing. I am in awe of you." They named him Thomas James Jensen, after Tom Burnett, who had become like a father to Yates, and they called him James to avoid confusion. The baby had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and from the moment he drew his first breath, he had both parents wrapped completely around his tiny fingers. Sarah and Charlie married the following spring, as planned, in a joyful ceremony that brought the whole community together. They moved into their new cabin, and Charlie continued to work the ranch while Sarah helped Victoria with little James and the household work. The arrangement suited everyone, and the ranch continued to prosper. Over the next few years, life settled into a pattern of hard work, deep love, and steady growth. The ranch expanded as Yates bought more land and cattle. Victoria's skill with numbers and negotiation helped them secure better contracts with buyers, and they began to earn a reputation for quality stock. Tom and Charlie remained loyal employees and dear friends, both men delighting in watching James grow. In the spring of 1886, Victoria gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Caroline Rose. She had her father's gray eyes and her mother's brown hair, and she was as fierce and strong-willed as her brother was, easygoing. Sarah and Charlie welcomed their own son later that same year, and the three children grew up together like siblings. One evening in the summer of 1887, Victoria and Yates sat on the porch watching the sunset as they had done so many times before. James, now nearly 4, played with his toy horses in the yard, while baby Caroline slept in Victoria's arms. The ranch spread around them, prosperous and peaceful, everything they had worked so hard to build. "Do you ever think about that day?" Victoria asked softly. "The auction?" Yates was quiet for a moment, his arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes, usually when I'm counting my blessings and trying to figure out what I did to deserve such happiness." "You bought 2 frightened women and set them free," Victoria said. "You gave us back our dignity and our future. That is what you did." "I bought the woman I would love for the rest of my life," Yates corrected. "Best $500 I ever spent, though it is a terrible thing to say." Victoria laughed softly. "It is terrible, but I know what you mean. Something good came from something awful. We found each other." "We found each other," Yates agreed. He pressed a kiss to her temple, careful not to wake the sleeping baby. "And I will be grateful for that every day until I die." James ran over to them then, demanding his father's attention to show him how his toy horse could jump over a fence made of sticks. Yates listened with exaggerated interest and proper admiration, making his son giggle with delight. Victoria watched them together, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. She thought about the girl she had been, standing on that platform in terror, thinking her life was over. She had been so wrong. Her life had not ended that day. It had begun. Everything she had endured, all the pain and fear and uncertainty, had led her to this moment, this man, this family. She would not change a single thing because it had brought her home. The years continued to pass in a blur of work and love and laughter. The ranch grew into one of the most successful operations in northern Nevada, respected throughout the territory for the quality of its cattle and the integrity of its owners. Yates and Victoria became pillars of the McGill community, known for their fairness and generosity. They helped other families in need, remembering what it felt like to have nothing, and they never turned away someone asking for work or a meal. In 1889, Victoria gave birth to twins, 2 more sons they named Daniel and Samuel. The house rang with the noise and chaos of 4 children, and Victoria often found herself exhausted but happier than she ever imagined possible. Yates was a devoted father, patient and loving with his children, teaching them to ride and work the ranch, while Victoria taught them letters and numbers. Sarah and Charlie had 3 more children over the years, and their cabin expanded to accommodate the growing family. The 2 couples remained as close as family, their children growing up together in the wild beauty of the Nevada range. Tom Burnett eventually retired from heavy ranch work, but stayed on in a small cottage Yates built for him, serving as a beloved grandfather figure to all the children. On their 10th wedding anniversary in October 1893, Yates took Victoria back to the place where he had proposed, the quiet spot on the range with the endless sky above. The children were home with Sarah and Charlie for the day, giving them rare time alone. 10 years, Yates said, holding her close as they stood looking out over the land. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know exactly what you mean," Victoria replied. She turned in his arms to face him, seeing the lines that time and sun had etched into his face, the gray beginning to show at his temples. He was 36 now, still strong and vital, but marked by the years of hard work. She knew she was marked too, no longer the frightened 21-year-old girl, but a woman of 31 who had lived and loved and built something meaningful. Thank you for these years. Thank you for loving me. Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done, Yates said simply. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 10 years of partnership and passion and promise. They made love there under the wide Nevada sky, in the grass and wildflowers, claiming each other with the same fierce tenderness that had marked their first time. Afterward, lying in each other's arms with the sun warm on their skin, Victoria felt a bone-deep contentment that was more precious than any treasure. I want to grow old with you, she said quietly. I want to watch our children grow up and have children of their own. I want to spend every day of the rest of my life right here with you. That is exactly what we will do, Yates promised. We will grow old together, and we will tell our grandchildren the story of how we met. They will not believe it. Victoria laughed. No, they probably will not. It is rather unbelievable, even to us. They returned to the ranch as evening fell, back to their children and their life and their love. The years continued to unfold in seasons of work and growth. The children grew taller and stronger, learning the ways of the ranch and the values their parents held dear. James showed a natural talent for working with horses, and eventually took over much of that responsibility from his father. Caroline grew into a fierce, independent young woman who could ride and rope as well as any man, much to her mother's pride. The twins were inseparable, always getting into mischief, but with good hearts. In 1896, Nevada achieved full statehood, and the Jensens celebrated along with their neighbors. The wild frontier they had known was slowly becoming more civilized, with better roads and more towns. But their ranch remained a place where hard work and integrity mattered most. They adapted to the changing times while holding on to the values that had built their success. Tom Burnett passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1897, at the age of 73. The loss hit the family hard, especially Yates, who had looked to Tom as a father figure for most of his life. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch with a simple marker that read, "Honest man, loyal friend." Victoria held Yates while he grieved, giving him the strength he had so often given her. Charlie Wade stepped up to become ranch foreman, proving himself more than capable of managing the operation alongside Yates. Sarah continued to be Victoria's closest friend and confidant, the bond between the cousins as strong as ever. Their children grew up as close as siblings, a tight-knit group that looked out for each other. As the century turned and 1900 arrived, Victoria and Yates found themselves in their late 30s, established and respected members of their community. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, cattle diseases and market fluctuations, but their partnership had never faltered. They remained deeply in love, still stealing kisses in the kitchen and holding hands on the porch at sunset. James, now 17, had grown into a fine young man who looked remarkably like his father. He had fallen in love with a neighbor's daughter, a sweet girl named Emma, and Yates and Victoria gave their blessing for them to court properly. Watching their eldest son navigate his first serious romance made them both nostalgic for their own beginning. "He is so young," Victoria said one night as they prepared for bed. "Just a year younger than I was when we met. And look how well that turned out," Yates pointed out with a smile. "If he has half the marriage we have had, he will be a lucky man." Victoria moved into his arms, resting her head on his chest, as she had done thousands of times over their 18 years together. His heartbeat was as familiar and comforting as her own. "I would not change a single moment," she said softly, "even the terrible ones, because they brought me to you." "I love you," Yates said, tilting her face up to kiss her. "More now than even on the day we married. I did not think that was possible, but you prove me wrong every day." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, but also with the passion that had never dimmed between them. Afterward, Victoria lay awake listening to Yates breathe beside her, thinking about the miraculous journey their lives had taken. From the auction block to this bed, from desperation to deep contentment, she had traveled so far. She had been saved by a cowboy with a scarred past and a generous heart, a man who had seen her humanity when the world wanted to treat her like property. He had torn up the papers that bound her and given her freedom, but she had freely chosen to bind her life to his, and it was the best decision she had ever made. James and Emma married in 1902, and Victoria and Yates became grandparents the following year when Emma gave birth to a daughter. Victoria held her tiny granddaughter and felt the wheel of life turning, generation to generation, carrying forward the legacy of love and family they had built. Caroline showed no interest in settling down, preferring to work the ranch alongside her father and brothers. She had grown into a formidable woman who could outride most men, and who ran the breeding program with skill and intelligence. Victoria saw so much of herself in her daughter's fierce independence and refused to push her toward marriage. Caroline would make her own choices in her own time. The twins went off to school in Carson City when they turned 18, both showing academic promise that Victoria encouraged. She wanted her sons to have opportunities she had never had, to see the world beyond the ranch if they chose. Daniel wanted to study law, while Samuel was drawn to veterinary medicine. Yates struggled with letting them go, but trusted Victoria's wisdom about education. In 1905, Yates surprised Victoria by having a portrait photographer come to the ranch. He gathered the entire family, children and grandchildren, Sarah and Charlie's brood, everyone who made up their extended family. The photograph captured a moment of joy and togetherness, a testament to everything they had built from the ashes of that terrible day in McGill. That night, Yates gave Victoria a gift, a leather-bound journal with blank pages. "Write our story," he urged. "Write it down so our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will know what we came from and what we survived. Write it so they understand the value of freedom and dignity and love." Victoria began writing, filling page after page with their history. She wrote about the auction and the fear, about the cowboy who tore up the papers and gave her a chance at life. She wrote about falling in love and building a family, about hard work and harder times, about the unshakable bond between two people who chose each other every day. She wrote it all down, the beautiful and the terrible, leaving nothing out. The ranch continued to thrive as they moved into their 60s. Yates's hair went fully gray, and Victoria's brown locks developed silver streaks that she wore with pride. They moved a bit slower, worked a bit less, but their love remained as vital as ever. They spent more time on the porch watching sunsets, more time with their grandchildren, more time simply being together. In 1910, on a warm spring morning, much like the one when Victoria had first arrived at the ranch 28 years earlier, she woke to find Yates already awake beside her, watching her with those steady gray eyes she loved so much. "Good morning," she murmured, smiling at him. "You are staring." "I am appreciating," he corrected. "Appreciating how beautiful you are, how lucky I am, how grateful I am for every day I get with you." Victoria reached up to touch his face, feeling the familiar contours and the roughness of morning stubble. "We have had a good life, haven't we?" "The best life," Yates agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible for an orphan boy and an auctioned girl." They rose and dressed, moving through their morning routine with the ease of decades of practice. Victoria made breakfast while Yates tended to a few early chores. The ranch was mostly run by James and Charlie now, with help from Daniel, who had returned after law school to practice in McGill and stayed close to home. Samuel had opened a veterinary practice serving all the ranches in the area. Caroline still lived at home, managing the breeding program with passionate dedication. After breakfast, Victoria and Yates walked out to the small family cemetery on the hill where Tom Burnett was buried. They had added a few other graves over the years, hands who had worked the ranch and had no family of their own, neighbors who had become friends. It was a peaceful spot with a view of the entire ranch spread below. "When my time comes," Yates said quietly, "I want to be buried right here, looking out over everything we built together." "Do not talk about that," Victoria said, squeezing his hand. "You have many years left." "I know. I am not ready to go anywhere. I just want you to know my wishes when the time comes. And Victoria, when you go, which had better be long after me because I cannot imagine this world without you in it, I want you right beside me, together, always." "Together, always," Victoria agreed. "That was the promise we made, and I intend to keep it." They stood there in comfortable silence, looking out over the land that had been both battlefield and sanctuary, the place where they had forged a family from nothing and built a legacy that would last for generations. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the Nevada landscape, bringing light to another day of the life they had created together. Victoria thought about the girl she had been, the woman she had become, and the man who had made all the difference. She thought about freedom and choice, about dignity reclaimed and love freely given. She thought about the children and grandchildren who bore their name and carried forward their values. And she thought about the cowboy who had seen her humanity when no one else did, who had torn up papers that tried to define her as property, who had loved her with a devotion that never wavered. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, for seeing me, for saving me, for loving me." Yates pulled her close, his arms still strong despite the years, his embrace still the safest place she knew. "You saved me too," he said into her hair. "You gave me a reason to build this life, a reason to hope, a reason to love. We saved each other." And that was the truth of it. They had saved each other, two broken people finding wholeness together, two lonely souls finding home. The auction had been the worst day of Victoria's life, but it had led her to the best days, the best years, the best love she could have imagined. They walked back to the house hand in hand, ready to face whatever the day brought, secure in the knowledge that they faced it together. The ranch hummed with activity around them, their family working and living and thriving on the foundation they had built. It was a legacy written not in gold or glory, but in love and choice and freedom, the most valuable legacy of all. Years continued to pass, and Yates and Victoria grew old together, as they had promised, their love deepening with every passing season. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a large and loving family, respected throughout Nevada for their integrity and generosity. They watched their children raise children of their own, and eventually those grandchildren began to have babies, making them great-grandparents. The ranch passed primarily to James, who ran it with the same values his parents had instilled, treating workers fairly and building on the success his father had created. Caroline eventually married a veterinarian who shared her passion for horses, a good man who loved her fierce spirit. The twins both married well and had families of their own while pursuing their professional careers. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1933, the family threw a huge celebration at the ranch. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren came from all over Nevada and beyond to honor Victoria and Yates. There was music and dancing and food, laughter and stories and tears of joy. Victoria wore a new dress that her daughters and daughters-in-law had made for her, and Yates wore a suit that made him grumble about being uncomfortable, but that made him look distinguished and handsome. They danced together as the sun set, moving slowly in each other's arms while their family watched and clapped. Yates, now 76 years old, still held Victoria like she was precious beyond measure. Victoria, 72, still looked at him like he was the answer to every prayer she had never dared to speak. 50 years, Yates murmured as they swayed to the music. "Half a century with you, not nearly long enough." "Then we will have to keep going," Victoria replied with a smile. "I am not ready to be done with you yet." "Good, because I plan to love you forever, which is going to take a while." They laughed together, the sound mingling with the music and the celebration around them. Later that night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, they sat on their porch one more time, looking out at the stars that had witnessed their entire journey. "Do you remember the journal you gave me?" Victoria asked. "The one where you wanted me to write our story." "Of course. I finished it, all of it, from the day of the auction to today. I want to give it to James to keep safe, so our family always knows where they came from." "That is perfect," Yates said, his voice thick with emotion. "They should know. They should know what real love looks like, what real courage looks like. They should know that sometimes the worst days can lead to the best lives." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting against him as naturally as breathing. "I would do it all again," she said softly. "Every moment of fear and pain, if it meant ending up right here with you." "I would buy you 1,000 times over," Yates replied. "And I would tear up those papers every single time, because you were never meant to be owned. You were meant to be loved." They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had built a love that would outlast them both. The ranch stretched around them, testament to their hard work and dedication. Their family slept peacefully in houses built on the foundation they had laid. And the Nevada night wrapped them in peace, the same land that had been wild and harsh when they started now, tamed and prosperous, yet still beautiful in its stark majesty. Yates Jensen and Victoria Olsen. Jensen lived several more years together, never far from each other's side, their love story becoming legend in their family and community. When Yates finally passed at the age of 81, peacefully in his sleep with Victoria holding his hand, she mourned him deeply, but without regret. They had been given more years and more love than most people ever dreamed of, and she was grateful for every single day. Victoria lived 2 more years before joining him, dying quietly in the same bed where they had shared 53 years of marriage. Their children buried her beside Yates on the hill overlooking the ranch, just as they had wished. The simple headstone read, "Together, always." The journal Victoria had written was passed down through the generations, carefully preserved and treasured. It became the family history, the reminder of where they came from and what their ancestors had overcome. The story of the auction, the cowboy, the torn papers, and the love that blossomed from the ashes of desperation was told and retold, never losing its power to move and inspire. The ranch remained in the family for generations, each one adding to the legacy while holding true to the values Yates and Victoria had established. The name Jensen became synonymous with integrity and fairness throughout Nevada, and on quiet evenings, family members would sometimes gather on the old porch and imagine they could still feel the presence of the 2 people who had started it all, the cowboy and the auction girl who had found in each other the freedom to love, the courage to hope, and the strength to build a future when the world had tried to take everything away. Their love story became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of one person choosing to see the humanity in another, to the transformative nature of genuine love, and to the truth that the worst circumstances can give birth to the most beautiful outcomes when met with courage and compassion. In the end, Victoria and Yates Jensen proved that love freely given is the greatest gift of all, that dignity restored can heal even the deepest wounds, and that 2 people who choose each other every single day can build a legacy that lasts far beyond their own lives. Their story lived on in the hearts and memories of everyone who came after them, a beacon of hope and love that would never fade, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, one act of kindness can change everything. The ranch still stands today, run by the great-great-grandchildren of Yates and Victoria, still holding true to the values established so long ago. And if you visit on a quiet evening and sit on the porch as the sun sets over the Nevada mountains, you might feel a whisper of the love that started it all. The love between a cowboy who bought freedom for 2 frightened women and tore up the papers that would have enslaved them, and a woman who chose to love him back with every fiber of her being. Their story ended not with tragedy, but with triumph. Not with separation, but with togetherness. Not with regret, but with a lifetime of joy and love that proved beyond doubt that sometimes, in the most unexpected ways, broken things can be made whole again.